Hello, everyone, and welcome to Revolution. I am coming to you live from my bedroom. My kids are in town, and my kids are here in the other room. Oh, I've still got to figure out how to get this blue light to not hit my face. Kids are here in the room, and so in the living room. So I decided I would just jump in here to the bedroom and do Revolution from here. So, welcome everybody to my makeshift studio today. So today I'm going to be talking about, and what's great too is that, by the way, what's great too is that sometimes my neighbor starts playing the bass downstairs, and then the kids' TV gets loud. So you might have some extra adventure today during the talk. We're going to be talking, going over Paul Tillich's shaking that we're going to go over Paul Tillich's "You Are Accepted" from Shaking the Foundations again, which I'm excited about. What else are we going to do? Can you guys hear me okay? Let me know if the audio is okay. We're always trying to make sure the audio is good. I feel like we've done. I've heard that people are really happy with it. Look, I'm going to give you an emotion. What's my emotion today? Here we go. There. All right, thank you. We've been told it sounds good, folks. We're on it. Last week we talked a little bit about just kind of about how Christianity has seemed to kind of lose its purpose, get away from really the things that it was supposed to, and we talked about in Matthew how it said, like, if you do these things, they will know you belong to me, and this is the when you build your house upon on a rock, on a solid foundation, and it's really wild because that all comes after the Beatitudes of loving the least of least, loving your neighbor as yourself, and doing these things. And every week, online, at least somewhere, I have a conversation or an argument with someone about, why they think people don't deserve meals, or why they think the poor don't deserve, food, or why they don't think, we deserve peace in the Middle East and things like that. And they're often Christians. And what's funny is they'll come and make these comments, and they don't always expect for me to kind of really back myself up and kind of push back. And when I push back, they get really upset. They get really upset and start to question my whole work. And, I work with the poor. What do? You're not solving. This guy last week was like, you're not solving anything, you're just talking about the problems. You're not giving us solutions. And I'm like, well, can recommend solutions, but I mean, obviously, like, I'm not going to go into the White House and be like, all right, we need to change this. And they're like, oh, okay, Mr. Baker. We love it. You're fantastic. We love it more. That's not going to happen. So, so there you go. But it's just always wild to me that people who say, well, I follow Christ, defend people going hungry, defend school children going hungry, defend Gazans and Palestinians going hungry, defend the war. Oh, Israel's in the Bible, so we should probably defend that. I'm like, listen, we don't want to see Israel attacked, but I'm not going to defend what they're doing and what their government's doing. So it's just so often that I find that Christianity has become so unlike Christianity. It's just not Christianity. Like, it's literally become another gospel, another news, another message. And, and so often I'll push people and say, listen, if you want to just, your politics first, and this is your politics, to just say it, oh no, and then but that's just unfortunately not the conversation people want to have. And it reminds me kind of apologetics, how we're always trying to fit things into the idea of like, make it work. I'll push it in together to work. And there's going to be contradictions, especially anytime we have to work with politics and Christianity. I mean, there's going to be, Christianity was nonviolent for the first 300 years. Like they did not support war. They did not support, military. They didn't support the government in that way at all until Constantine came along. So we're always going to have some compromise and some contradiction that we have to struggle with. And I think we have to realize, like, what are the ones we have to live with and what are the things that we can change? And it does really start out with, I think, speaking out. And in a way, almost like reclaiming our faith, reclaiming Christianity, and speaking the truth to people. I don't think we need to hurt people. And my hope is that we can help change minds and change hearts and help people go, oh, this is the faith. We should be more like this. We should grow from that. That's where I seek conversion, not necessarily to be like, I need you to believe in Jesus, but usually right now we're talking about inner stuff. So they're already Christians, but trying to help them follow Jesus and find this truth and get it set free from like this kind of Christian American religious eliteness. I mean, even when I look at like, uh, Catholicism and things like that, and you go like, how do these things grow out of, the life of Jesus? But they do. And I think it's important for us to live in a life of, reformation has to happen now. And I think that's why we got to have the tough conversations. And, I got a text message last night from a friend of mine, and she was like, hey, somebody sent this to me, and it was them saying, thank you for introducing me to Revolution. I've been listening to some of their stuff and read some of their stuff, and it's just really a breath of fresh air, and it's really helped me. And so I try to live on those encouragements that, hey, we're doing stuff that's making people think differently. We're doing stuff that's helping people change, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's super, super liberal, super liberal. I mean, I'm leftist, but this guy's like really leftist, more like left Democrat, super liberal. And they listened to my interview that I did with the therapist, the analyst, the psychoanalyst, and they said, "Oh, that arguing well concept is really interesting. I really like that." And I was like, "Well, thanks." I said, "I feel like that's something my mom would have kind of eventually done or supported, or it's kind of building on that foundation of my mother's work." Um, and he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "I've seen about 3 people out of a million change." And it was funny because he was like, "Well, that's a start, and that's where we need to be." And so it was really encouraging because this person's not a Christian at all, don't want anything to do with Christians or anything like that. But they were super encouraged by the fact that, hey, this is helping people think differently and making Christians seem less unhinged. And I think that's what happens when we start to kind of say, all right, we're going to go back to the basis of what this faith is. We're going to reclaim this faith. So there's my soapbox. And 2, I think it says a lot about a person when you disagree with them, and instead of them arguing, well, they just tear down your whole line of work and your life's work. Probably not winning the argument at that point. What do I got here? I got some other things in my notes. I think one of the other things I was trying to say is like, with that kind of apologetic thinking, with that kind of trying to push things in and make things work, it's often tribal too, so it's often like depending on, oh, we're on this tribe or that tribe or this church or that political thing or that way of thinking or this group, and we try to make it fit our tribes, and it's just this idea is that we should allow it to come in and break us up and freak us out and cause us to wrestle with it. I think that's what we've got to do. So there you go. Hey, listen, don't forget to like and subscribe. My son always reminds me to say that. Don't forget to like and subscribe. turn on the notifications so you know when we come on. So, hey, here's the book we've been going through. We started last week. Paul Tillich is Shaking the Foundations. This is actually a really old copy. It's all like yellowed and nice. I love this. Smells delightful. And it's his sermon he wrote called "You Are Accepted." If you missed last week, I highly recommend going back and giving it a listen. We also, Peter Rollins recorded, because the sermon was never recorded, so it's just written down, and you can go to Google and Google "You Are Accepted" by Paul Tillich, and it'll come up, and it's a really fantastic sermon. But we had Pete Rollins in his lovely Irish accent read it for us, so you can, right here on the YouTube channel, hear that. It's also available on our podcast on Apple and Spotify and all those different places, but you can listen to him read the whole thing if you don't want to read it. But I recommend like getting it, printing it out. I recommend just getting the order of this. They have newer editions of this book. I've got like 5 or 6 of them, and you can get this book really cheap on eBay, or I recommend eBay, so you don't have to support Amazon. And all these sermons are killer. It's just, this one is just really, really heavy. So we're going to continue where we left off. I'll kind of cover just a little bit of the last ground we covered, where Tillich says, "And now let us look down into ourselves and to discover there is a struggle between separation and reunion, between sin and grace, in our relation to others and our relation to ourselves, in our relation to the ground of and aim of being," which is what Tillich calls God. "If our souls respond to the description that I intend to give, words like sin and separation, grace and reunion may have a new meaning for us. But the words themselves are not important. It is the response of the deepest level of our being that is important. If such a response were to occur among us this moment, we could say that we have known grace." And honestly, I feel like that's been the whole work of Revolution. That's been kind of everything, is like wanting to have people have that response to grace and to say, "I've known grace. I've seen that, and we want to see that happen." And I love this idea of grace as reunion and sin as separation. And we're not pluralizing sins or picking out sins, but we're just going, what separates us and what brings us back together. All right. So this is the part we haven't read yet. "Who has not at some time been lonely in the midst of a social event? The feeling of separation from the rest of life is most acute when we are surrounded by it in noise and talk. We realize that much more than in a moment of solitude, how strange we are to each other. How estranged," now listen to this, "how estranged life is from life." And I'm going to preach from this sermon. How cool is that? I'm taking a sermon and I'm going to make a sermon on the sermon. But this idea of how estranged life is from life. And right now we're there, man. I mean, we're up to here in that estrangement from one another and everything that's happening in this world, how we're treating each other, how we're treating the least of these, you know, and our president is a part of that, and it's like just continues to throw crazy crap at us all day long, and it feels like we don't have any rest. It feels terrifying sometimes to be in this country. I am heartbroken on the behalf of so many others of watching people just being treated less than human uh, here in this country and all over the world. And truly, we have become estranged from life. And so, what Tillich is calling us to, what Christ is calling us to, what grace is calling us to, is a reunion with life. All right, let's go on a little more here. "How estranged life is from life. Each one of us draws back into themselves. We cannot penetrate the hidden center of another individual, nor can that individual pass beyond the shroud that covers our own being. Even the greatest love cannot break through the walls of the self. Who has not experienced that disillusionment of all great love? If one were to hurl away his self in complete self surrender, he would become a nothing without from the strength of self, without self, merely an object of contempt and abuse. Our generation knows more than the generation of our fathers about the hidden hostility in the grounds of our souls. Today, we know much about the profuse aggressiveness in every being. Today, we can confirm what Immanuel Kant, the prophet of human reason and dignity, was honest enough to say: there is something in the misfortune of our best friends which does not displease us. Who among us is dishonest enough to deny that this is true also of themselves? Are we not almost always ready to abuse everybody and everything, although often in a very refined way? I love that. I mean, how many arguments I feel like that's what we're having these arguments. That's why I've just stopped trying to be refined when I'm trying to be as honest as possible with a lot of my disagreements. But people really try to be like, we're going to be really adult about this disagreement. I'm going to be really adult about tearing you apart and telling you why you're wrong. Are we not almost ready to abuse everybody and everything, although often in a very refined way, for the pleasure of self-elevation, for on occasion, for boasting, for a moment of lust, to know that we are ready to know the meaning of the separation of life from life, and sin abounds? So, this idea of building ourselves up, being and humiliating people in a refined way is the sin abounds here. The most irrevocable expression of the separation of life from life today is the attitude of social groups with, now I love this part because this is just where we're at right now. I mean, this book's written in like the 50s, probably late 40s, early 50s. The most irrevocable expression of the separation of life from life today is the attitude of social groups within nations towards each other. The walls of distance in time and space have been removed by technological progress. And there was no he's talking about telephones, Um, but the walls of estrangement between heart and heart have been incredibly strengthened. And if you think about it, even with being online, all the different social medias, the more we've gotten closer to one another, almost the more estranged we've become. It used to be that you would just turn on the nightly news and be like, oh, that's a crazy group of people over there. But now we're just continuously almost finding ways to track each other down and declare our separation from each other, to declare that I do not believe what you believe. I'm often surprised, like, by people who come to tell me how much they disagree with me, because I'm like, listen, like right now, what's the count? We have 8 people here. I'm like, I'm talking to 8 people a week. I'm barely paying my bills. I'm working like all these different jobs. Like, you felt the need to come tell me that what I believe is horrible. Like, that's not going to change anything either. Um, so the walls of distance and the time and space have been removed by technical progress, but the walls of estrangement between heart and heart have been incredibly strengthened. The madness of the German Nazis and the cruelty of the lynching mobs in the South provide too easy an excuse for us to turn our thoughts from our own selves. But let us just consider ourselves and what we feel when we read this morning and tonight in the same section of Europe. All the children under the age of 3 are sick and dying. Or that some sections of Asia, millions without homes are freezing and starving to death. That's happening right now, am I right? The strangeness of life to life is evident And that strange fact that we can know all this and yet can live today, this morning, tonight, and through, we were completely ignorant. Like, we know all this, we know all this stuff. And that's what gets me too, is like, why I can't shut up about what's happening in Gaza. Why I can't shut up about, what's happening in the Congo. Why I can't shut up about what's happening to our immigrant brothers and sisters right now. Why I have to keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. You know, and it's just, we were able to go through our days and have dinner, have a laugh, go see a film, do all these things as though none of it's happening. So we've become really good at separating ourselves from the suffering of others. Maybe that's why we need, pastors and poets and musicians and comedians and stuff to kind of point these things out to us quite often. And to remind us of these things. It's like, I just kind of want to remind you everything's shit, enjoy your dinner. I've always been maladjusted to that. So in some ways I've been grateful, but also some ways it makes you feel crazy because it makes you feel like, well, why can't I be normal? So my work comes out from a bit of a maladjustment. The morning tonight, I thought we were. I refer to the most sensitive people among us, and both mankind and nature, life is separated from life. Estrangement prevails among all things, lives, sin abounds. And he's right, because I'm very sensitive, but I have to move on. You go on with life, you forget things, you try to have a good time. I try to bury myself in a good podcast or something like that. It is important to remember that we are not merely separated from each other, for we are also separated from ourselves. All right, oh, we got 12 people now. We're all separate. We're all separated from ourselves. Paul Tillich used mostly male pronouns, so sometimes that's what you're just going to get when I forget to try to change them up. But here it goes. Man, I would say man as human beings, but man against themselves is not merely the title of a book, but rather also indicates the rediscovery of an age-old insight. Man is split within themselves. Life moves against itself through aggression, hate, and despair. I mean, I grew up most of my life hating myself, dealing with myself. I listen to Mark Maron a lot, and I just, the battle that guy has with the self-doubt and self-hate. And here he is, this really talented guy doing amazing stuff. Most of us would kill to have his career, and he still turns in on himself. And I hear that with a lot of comedians. I listen to a lot of comedian shows. The philosophers kind of stay away from the personal stuff, and I like the personal stuff. So I have to listen to philosophers, but then I need my comedians to get some self-deprecation in there. Life moves against itself through aggression, hate, and despair. We want to condemn self-love. It says we are wont to condemn self-love. But what we really mean to condemn is contrary to self-love. It is that a mixture of selfishness and self-hate that permanently pursue us, that prevent us from loving others, and that prohibits us from losing ourselves in love with which we are loved eternally. He who is able to love himself is able to love others also. He who has learned to overcome self-contempt has overcome his contempt for others. But the depth of our separation lies in just the fact that we are not capable of great and merciful divine love towards ourselves. On the contrary, each of us, there is instinct of self-destruction, which is strong as our instinct of self-preservation. The death drive, smoking cigarettes, drinking, doing, all the things that we do. And our tendency to abuse and destroy others, there is an open or hidden tendency to abuse and destroy ourselves. That's so vitally important to remember. Like for me, when I'm having conversations with people who are extremely angry and really like supporting cruelty towards so many folks, I have to step back and go like, well, what are these folks doing to themselves? How hard do they have to be in themselves? At my most religious in my life, my most judgmental in my life was probably, is somewhere in a teenager, uh, Christian teenager. It was also at the heights of my self-hate and and often just kind of projecting that onto others. And I think that's why nonviolence talks about reunion and things like that. Why revolution, why we talk so much about grace and accepting that you are accepted by that which is greater than yourself. Because that acceptance allows you to have grace for others because you know what goes on in your inner dialogue. Like a few weeks ago, I talked about why do I talk about grace? Well, I talk about grace is because I don't have a lot of it often for people or myself. And for me, it's always been something that's so like freeing and something I have to remind myself on a basis, which this sermon is one of the best on grace, not mine, but Tillich's. Uh, and it changes me. Why do I still follow in Christianity when Christianity seems so warped, so sadistic at times, so divisive at times, really just horror show sometimes, is because I see beyond that bullshit. And I see within the tradition, I see the earlier tradition, I see the grace, I see the self acceptance, I see the love for other, I see the love for enemy. I'm reminded of Paul saying, if you think you're too good to restore somebody, if you think you're too good to help somebody, you're only fooling yourself. That's when you're really a nobody, is when you're unwilling to love and help others. And I see what it says about the least of these. I mean, building the thing on a foundation isn't that I've got my life together. Building rock and foundation is just that I want to help other people and love other people. Um, it is that mixture of selfishness and self-hate that permanently presses us to prevent us from loving each other, that prohibits us from losing ourselves and the love within which we are loved internally. He who is able to love himself is able to love others also. He who has learned to overcome self contempt has overcome his contempt for others. But the depths of our separation lies just in the fact that we are not capable of great and merciful divine love towards ourselves. On the contrary, in each of us, there is an instinct of self destruction. We already read some of this, but we're going to go over it again, which is strong in our instinct of self preservation and our tendency to abuse and destroy others. There is an open or hidden tendency to abuse and destroy ourselves. Cruelty towards others is always cruelty towards ourselves. Now, this is coming from someone who's not just a theologian and he's also a philosopher. He understands the mind. He was one of the greatest. He was on the cover of Time back in the 50s when it really mattered. Paul Tillich is a very, very intelligent man. Like, if you try to read his other works, they're very dense. They're very hard to read. They're very deep in theology and psychology and philosophy. He was one of the greatest, probably the greatest living philosopher of the 20th century. Huge impact on Martin Luther King Jr., just to name one person that he really impacted. So cruelty towards others is always cruelty towards ourselves. And that's something to kind of like keep in your mind, keep in the back pocket. Remember when that cruelty, you go to strike cruelty towards someone, you go, oh, or when they're doing it towards you, remember that maybe, well, they're questioning everything about my life. Well, maybe they're questioning their whole life as well as they question mine. Nothing is more obvious than the split in both of our unconscious life and our conscious personality. Without the help of modern psychology, Paul expressed the fact in his famous words, "For I do not do the good I desire, but rather the evil that I do not desire." And then he continued in words that might as well have been the motto of all depth psychology, which is true. The unconscious is kind of revealed through the Apostle Paul. "Now, if I should do what I do not wish to do, is it not I that do it, but rather sin which dwells within me?" The apostle sensed a split between his conscious will and his real will, between himself and something strange within the alien and alien to him. He was estranged from himself, and the estrangement he called sin. So this estrangement, this unconscious, this separation is what Paul calls sin. And it's really more beautiful when you're able to see it like that than think of it as like everything I was raised with was like booze and partying and secular music and rated R movies and all the bullshit, being a liberal. um he's literally saying like separation from oneself, torture of one's unconscious, doing the things we want to, don't want to do, but doing them anyway. He also called it a strange law in his limbs, an irresistible compulsion. How often we commit certain acts in perfect consciousness, yet with a shocking sense that we are being controlled by an alien power. That is the experience of the separation of ourselves from ourselves, which is to say, sin, whether or not we like to use that word. So you don't have to use that word. You say, it's my unconscious. Thus, the state of our whole life is estrangement from others and estrangement from ourselves. Because we are enraged, entrangled from the ground of our being, because we are estranged from the origin and aim of our life, and we do not know where we have come from or where we are going, we are separated from the mysteries of the depth and the greatness of our existence. We hear the voice of that depth, but our ears are closed. We feel something radical, totally and unconditional, is demanding of us, but we rebel against it and try to escape the urgency and will not to accept its promise. We cannot escape, however. It is something to the ground of our being. We are bound to it for all eternity, just as we are bound to ourselves and to others in life. I wasn't even thinking about this part last night, but I often think about like, I was thinking about my parents' ministry. Sometimes when I listen to podcasts, I get bored. So I just go online and type in really random things into eBay. And like, I'll be like, oh, I'm going to look at like blacklight posters, or I'm going to, look at books about Belfast. I don't buy anything too often on there, but I just like, oh, I'll save it and maybe look at it later. I want to go and see you can look up antiques and stuff and just look and explore things over time. And somehow these old postcards from Heritage USA, my parents' church and ministry, came up, and like the trams that we used to drive people to different places, and one of the restaurants and all this stuff. And I was thinking about my parents and what they did, and like they were really trying to, in a lot of ways, tell people like you can be a human being and follow Christ. And I feel like that's kind of what I am myself doing in this world, is you can be Christian and you can be normal. You can be a human being. Human beings can be Christians. Yes, it was a Heritage USA postcard. And so I'm just like, I was just thinking like, that's the thing, is like, I've just been wanting to humanize Christianity. And I feel like there's this separation that happens in the church today of people trying to disassociate from humanity. And oh, I'm going to die to my flesh, and they've taken these words and turned them into things of thinking that I'm going to disassociate from my better parts. Like, I'm going to listen to half-assed art and music, and I'm going to go sit in a community, and I'm going to avoid other people, and I'm going to deny myself all these things, and I'm going to deny other people if they don't listen to. And it's like your humanity is being taken away in the name of Jesus, who's like saying like there's neither male nor female, nor Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, for we're all one. There is no separation, and we continue to separate ourselves from one another. Now I know some people are like, oh, I can find verses that tell me to do that. But I was always surprised growing up. Like I was looking at the life of Jesus, and I was like, everything I was taught by my youth pastor, like in high school, was exactly the opposite of Jesus. Don't hang out with those people, don't go to those places, and don't do those things. And I'm like going, and I started reading the Bible for myself and really reading the Gospels and going like, well, Jesus hung out with those people and he went to those places and he was said he did those things. So I'm going like, why am I hearing why am I being told to separate from my humanity, to separate from others? I mean, even when I started with doing Revolution in Arizona, I was just one of the founders, but I wasn't the pastor at the time. My friend who was the pastor, and he's changed over the years, but at the time he was like, you spend a lot of time hanging out at those coffee shops and those skateboard shops with all those people. I don't know if that's really ministry. And to me, that's what my whole life was based on at that time, is like spending time with people and allowing to share in their humanity and in your humanity, as like, here we are in a common human experience. To me, that felt like what Christianity was, because if God is the creator of everything and the human, wouldn't it be just being human? I one time had my sponsor in AA say I was haphazardly human, and I wasn't sure if it was meant to be a compliment or not, but I wear it kind of now as a badge of honor. So this reconnection, those are what we're called to do, is to connect with people and be humans and to live life on life's terms. Terms. Um, we'll like, I want to save like the last part for next week, because I mean it's just like just bam, 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 and it's like just hit after hit after hit. Um, like this is like barely even touched the best part. It's like he really crafted this talk really well. Um, Thus, the state of our whole life is estrangement from others and ourselves, because we are estranged from the ground of being, which it was what Tillich called God, because we are estranged from the origin and aim of life, and we do not know where we have come from, where we are doing, why we are separated from the mystery and the depth of greatness of existence. We hear a voice in a depth, but our ears are closed. We feel something radical, totally unconditional, demanding us, but we rebel against it and try to escape its urgency and will not accept the promise. We cannot escape it, however. And this reminds me, when I was having a conversation, I went with Soul Force and we went and met with Joel Osteen. And I ended up getting a meeting with Joel Osteen one-on-one. And I was talking to him about being affirming. And we were talking about what the Bible says and what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah actually, and all this stuff. And we were really going for it. But he had some people there to make sure that we didn't go for it too much. And I was like, man, this is the future. Inclusion is the future. That's where we're heading. He goes, well, I keep trying to tell him that. I remember him saying that. Like, I keep trying to tell the other people here who are telling me we can't. And then and literally, like, I think it was his brother-in-law claiming, we'll never be an affirming church. But I feel like that, I heard that desire from Joel Osteen, from this mega preacher, going inside his heart saying, I want to be inclusive. I want to be inclusive, but I don't know how to do it because I'm afraid of what others think. Because I'm separated from my own self. I'm afraid to be, I'm afraid to be me. I'm afraid to be ultimately transparent and human. And like, if I separate, I'm afraid to separate from the people who are around me and from my leaders, and I'm afraid of this. And so all this fear and all this led to even more separation. So separation leading to more separation, of like the fear of being like, well, we'll put our foot down and you won't have a job, Joel, but I could tell that his heart was inclusion. Like, you could see in that moment, this beacon of like, I know that's what I keep thinking and what I keep saying. But his people said, no, 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 no. Someone wrote, Joel Osteen is a viper. Well, I mean, maybe we're all vipers in a certain sense. To somebody, we're somebody's vipers, you know? His heart is money. I don't know. I don't have the, I'm not going to judge a guy. I don't watch him. I don't know much about him. So if you can do that, you're a better man than me. I mean, that's the same thing people said about my parents. So, um, but I have met with him. I don't know if you've met with him, but I have sat in a room and had a conversation with him. One of the other things that impressed me about him was he asked for my sister's phone number, and I thought, well, he's never going to call my sister. And like a month or two later, my sister's like, "Did you have somebody call me pretending to be Joel Osteen?" I'm like, "No, that was actually Joel Osteen." So that was funny. And hearts can be changed. Isn't that a good thing? And that's what we do. That's why I'm a follower of nonviolence and Christianity. Um, if we want the Gnostic Gospels to be someone's the Gnostic Gospel hour, we don't know, right? The secret Gospels. Don't we want grace to be there? Don't we want to show grace for them? Don't we want to hope that he can change and become a better person? I mean, everybody has got certain things that bring them down. All sin, all fall short, but yet God in his gracious kindness declares us not guilty. Yeah, grace is a real pain in the ass sometimes. Um, um, just as we are bound to ourselves and to all other life, we always remain in the power of that from which we are estranged. More estrangement. The fact brings us to the ultimate depth of sin, separated and yet bound, estranged and yet belonging, destroyed and yet preserved. Listen to that again. Let's review that one more time. We always remain in the power of that from which we are estranged. And I was thinking about this as well as Hegel's concept of contradiction and how this kind of fits into what Paul Tillich is saying here. Um, we always remain in the power and faith from which we are estranged. The fact brings us into the ultimate depth of sin, separated and yet bound, estranged and yet belonging, destroyed and yet preserved, the state which is called despair. And in some ways, that's probably where Pastor Olstein was, kind of like, I want inclusion, but it's not in the cards. Tillich says, despair means that there is no escape. And I've been in that. I mean, I when I tried to take my life, that was the depths of despair. Despair means, and it was a lie from depression, but despair means that there is no escape. Despair is the sickness unto death. But the terrible thing about the sickness of despair is that we cannot be released, not even through open or hidden suicide. For we all know that we are bound internally and inescapable to the ground of being. The abyss of separation is not always visible, but it has become more visible to our generation and to the preceding generations because of our feelings feelings of meaninglessness, emptiness, doubt, and cynicism, all expressions of despair. So the cynicism that we often see, like I see with my conservative friends about me, and then I see folks on the left who are so cynical that they won't even talk to anybody on the right, and they just judge each other, and it's just like they're just mirror images of one another, and the cynicism is so thick that it's like, man, I don't want to go to a church, I don't want to walk into a church building, I don't want to hang out with Christians, because it feels like cynicism is everywhere. Everybody's cynical of each other, and there's so much cynicism, and they're all aiming at each other, and they don't realize that they're also probably unconsciously aiming it at themselves, with all this, and it's this expression of despair. It goes on to say, all expressions of despair are our separation from the roots of the meaning of our life. Sin in its most profound sense, sin as despair abounds amongst us. So this cynicism and this despair and this giving up, and so many times, I don't know, I've written to Dr. King, Martin Luther King's daughter, Bernice King, a few times. I've never heard back from her. At one time she liked something, but how much her life and her father's life and her family's life has kept me going every day in my work, because there's so many times where I just wanted to say, I give up on these people. Like they can't, like even the most progressive leftist can't love the person on the right, you know. And I thought the people on the left would get the grace, but then they don't seem to have grace for the people on the right, and the people on the right don't have people for the left. So they're saying you're all going to go to hell, and then these people are saying we're inclusive. Even my friends who are universalists, which I lean towards, sometimes I see them being really the harsh judges towards some of these ministers and some of these politicians and stuff, you know. And I get that this is the reality of life, but at the same point I'm going like, well, if we're inclusionists, if we're ministers, followers of Christ, followers of these apostle folks, if we're really inclusive, you know, how is us mocking and tearing these people apart going to change their lives? How is that going to lead to them having a repentance of their own life and a physical change in their own life, you know? um how is that going to happen? So Paul Tillich quotes Paul the apostle here and says, where sin abounds, grace did much more abound, says Paul in the same letter, in which describes the unimaginable power of separation and self-destruction within society and individual soul. He does not say these words because its sentimental interests demand a happy ending for everything tragic. He says them because it describes the most overwhelming and determining experience of his life. Yeah, it's true. And the picture of Jesus as Christ, which appeared to him at the moment of his greatest separation from other men and from himself and from God. He found himself accepted in spite of his being rejected. You know, this concept of where, you know, he's much like the much kind of like Matthew in the midst of being a tax collector, you know. Instead he's in this Pharisee going to persecute Christians, you know. And he must have had the permission of Rome to do that, because you know, so there's some sort of interwoven stuff. We've talked about religion and politics mixing together sometimes like manure and ice cream. um but he goes, this minute of separation where he so desperately wants to, like, those people are the enemy, those people are the wrong, the Christians are the ones screwing everything up. You know, if we can get rid of those Jesus followers, we can, you know. And then what happens? He becomes a Jesus follower. Very interesting. So where sin abounds, grace did abound much more. He says this because they describe the most overwhelming, demeaning experience of his life. I'm reading over that again. And the picture of Jesus as the Christ, which appeared to him at a moment of his greatest separation from other men and from himself and from God. He found himself accepted in spite of his being rejected. And when he found that he was accepted, he was able to accept himself and to be reconciled to others. You get that? And when he found that he was accepted, he was able to accept himself and be reconciled to others. When, you know, and probably be, after Jesus, the most important person to Christianity that there is, you know. And it has allowed me to understand Jesus and grace. And, you know, I wouldn't be here without that. You know, Paul never mentions the word hell. Paul talks about grace. Galatians is probably one of the greatest books on grace ever written. And you have even him in his moments of being the most judgmental, hateful person, of wanting to destroy Christians. I mean, someone was talking about greed from another pastor. I mean, talk about a type of greed that's even worse. Is like, well, let's get these people imprisoned and tortured and killed. You know, violence. Um, how do I work with the government to figure this out? You know, and then God shows up and he goes, I'm accepted. And he goes, what have I done? What have I become? I mean, it's such a huge thing. How many of us could do that I think that's often the problem is we build our identity within these politics or in these types of religion or these type of ideas, and we build this identity in it. And then when we realize it's wrong, or we have a harder time realizing it wrong because our whole identity is built up in it. And I'm much like probably what Joel Osteen was like. My life is just I'm too deep in. I can't get out of this, you know. And he's having that moment of like, but you could, you know. And when you form, so that's what happens here. He found himself accepted in spite of being rejected. And when he found he was accepted, he was able to accept himself and to be reconciled to others. I mean, that is true reconciliation. He was able to denounce what he was doing, denounce who he was, and then use all of that to grow into another person that changed the world. That's pretty amazing. The moment in which grace struck him, overwhelmed him, he was reunited to that which he belonged and from which he was estranged, an utter strangeness. Do we know what it means to be struck by grace? That's going to be our cliffhanger. Do we know what it means to be struck by grace? Thank you, Zoe, for keeping me focused on the talk. I sometimes get too focused on the comments, and then if you want to argue with me in comment sections, Facebook and Instagram and all those places are probably a better place to do that. I mean, I do try to have some conversations here, but great place to do that. So thank you, Zoe, for that. Thanks, everybody. Speaking of being driven by money, Revolution could really use your support. We're a nonprofit and we can't make it without you. Some of you know I've been working a few other jobs and also been the government's even been helping me get groceries now, which is like a huge burden off this month. And my kids are just great, and I'm able to take care of my kids and work, do this, and then do a few other jobs that are great. But with Revolution, I would love to do Revolution full time again, but we can only do that with you. So if you go to revolutionchurch.com, you can make a tax deductible donation either through PayPal or Amazon. So we'll get that out of the way, but we could use your help. Other ways you can help is by sharing these with other people, liking and subscribing, following, turn on the notifications. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you could leave us a 5-star review. That would also help a lot, and just getting the word out there. And hey, be human, be haphazardly human, and you can still follow Jesus and find that reunion, find that grace. We'll talk even more and go in depth. We'll finish the Tillich sermon next week, and I'm really excited about it because it just really goes off after that, And I'm grateful for you all, and yeah. Sorry, guys, I got a little thrown off there because sometimes I talk about why I try to preach grace, and sometimes I don't feel it. I was getting an argumentative mode there for a second, so forgive me. I was, wanting to debate and argue well, but that's right now is not the time to do that. But I hope we can, realize like that idea of being reunited with ourselves and helping us be reunited with others. And that we don't give up complete hope for the other. Because, only we know what's going on inside of us. We can never know the center of a human being, as Tillich was saying. We can never know what's really drives another person, what really was within that person. And, we can know how one's faith is, I guess, through the fruits of the Spirit, through peace and patience and kindness and joy and all that kind of stuff. But, and Jesus said, we'll be known by our love for one another's. And Paul said the most important thing is faith expressing itself in love. But what's wild about this is this whole sermon. Another thing that this whole sermon hits into is that love your neighbor as yourself, but as self part is we must learn to love ourselves and be reconciled to ourselves as well in order to really love our neighbors. And maybe that's where we got to help folks, is to find peace within themselves. All right, folks. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a great week, and I'll be here next week. I keep having these little ideas that I want to throw up online. So there'll probably be some clips up through the week and maybe some special announcements. I've been doing videos on Instagram that aren't part of the talks, but are like bonus stuff that I just feel like doing. Or if I forgot something, I'll throw it up on Instagram and Facebook so you can follow that there as well. Thank you all again. Zoe, as always, thank you. I love you. You always remind me what grace really is. All right, folks. Love you all so much. Um, Here, I'm going to give you, I got to pick an emotion here. I can't really see them all that well, but look, oh, and, look, I'm kind of scared. Sorry for all of you who listening to the podcast. You're not getting to see all my really funny little YouTube emojis that I get to put up. So here, ah, all right, everybody. Love you guys. Um, be good to each other and love each other. And all right, bye bye.